Hello, Tim here, and welcome to an edited recording of a demonstration given to my Patreon members. Every month, I give my Patreon folks a challenging subject to paint in watercolor, and in this one, we tackled this beach scene at Seaview on the Isle of Wight in the UK. The key challenges of this scene was, first of all, taking quite a wide photo there and trying to condense it, crop it, and make it a little bit narrower for the format, the dimensions of paper I'm using. Then trying to get a sense of depth with the succession of headlands that we've got going into the distance. And the layout of the boulders on the beach. Look at all those boulders, trying to get them connected and making them look realistic as boulders on that beach. Also, of course, trying to think about a range of values. For example, look at the light hitting that little boulder on the right-hand side, the light hitting, that warm light hitting the right-hand side of that larger boulder. So thinking about those values and also warm versus cool in the color and the color of that sand as well. How would you replicate the color of that sand? Yellow ochre, burnt sienna, a little bit of red, bit of white. What would you choose? And those figures to contemplate as well. Of course, got to have figures that add a sense of scale to the scene, a bit of interest, a bit of a focal point as well. In this video, I'm going to go through the whole painting process with you, from the initial drawing and then applying a wash, adding in then my darker values and then the details. And if you want to take part in projects like this, please take a look at my Patreon site, information in the description, and check out the different levels there where you can receive a personal video critique from me and get involved in loads of other painting projects as well through the month. So you join me on my demo just as I'm going through the materials that I'm using. As I sometimes do, rarely if I'm painting on my own, but as I sometimes do for these workshops, just before coming on here live, I thought about the key elements of the scene and the composition of the scene and things that I may want to concentrate on, think on for you, with you. So we've got basically the composition. Hopefully you can see this with the succession of three headlands, the most distant one there, and then the middle one, and then the near one where all those brighter greens are. Coming towards us, of course, we've got the element of the sea. We are at low tide, as you can see with those boulders, the rocks, they were draped in seaweed, weren't they? So there, I guess they're completely covered at high tide. But this particular scene, low tide, we've got that, I guess that fairly damp, compact, sandy beach. I put in a sand color. What's the color of sand? What combination of colors would you color, or colors in your palette would you select? And the ratio of those together to get that realistic color of sand. I've got a few ideas for you in looking at that scene with the palette of colors I've got. So simplify the boulders. We've got the light coming from the top right corner. I think this photo was taken mid-afternoon, late afternoon. So we've got the light coming in from the west, a few shadows coming across, cool shadows, and not very dark as well. Talking about darks, the darkest area was right there under that boulder, and also a little bit above this large boulder here. The lightest areas, well, the sand's quite light, the lady's hat is quite light. I'm going to try and pick up on that, the placement of the figures, trying to make them a little bit closer to me so that I can exploit the contrast of the light of the summer hat there against that middle headland. Yes, so playing on contrasts, all right, and also playing on warm versus cool. When you look at this big boulder here, at the top, it starts off with quite a nice warm color, and then goes quite cool. And then we got that very, very dark value there, quite light on this little boulder, this little baby boulder there, and a bit of contrast between the light and the dark of those two together. Quite dark also in this area because the light coming from the right-hand side. There's a boulder on the left-hand side. You may want to include some boats. Depending on how much space you've got on the left, you could sneak some boats in. If you want to keep it simple, maybe some thin triangles. There could be, it's a popular sailing area around the Isle of Wight. And that would be very appropriate to put in if you've got the space. Don't have it too far over on the left-hand side. Otherwise, it'd just be conflicting and with the other elements of the scene. Right, anything else? Sky, quite a simple sky, simple wash, dark here, going light towards the bottom right-hand corner. A little bit of light coming in just here. There's a sort of hazy light coming on the right-hand side of that middle headland as well. So those are my thought processes there with some headlines. I'll move this off to my side. I might peer at that now and again. As I say, if I was painting on my own, I probably wouldn't look at the outline sketch. I sometimes get confused. It's sometimes difficult to look at the source photo for inspiration, and at the same time looking in parallel at the thumbnail sketch. And I personally find it difficult to do the two together. So I might end up just peering over the source photo now and again for a bit of inspiration. Right, let me go through my materials with you, and then I'll just check for any questions, and then I'll dive into doing the initial outline drawing, which will be quite simple here. There's not a lot to it. The different elements that I've shown you on my outline sketch. Right, materials. I've got Saunders Waterford cold press paper. This is the natural color, not the high white. Yeah, cold press. That's medium texture, roughness. 15 by 11. The colors I'm using are professional grade colors from Mark Chapman in the UK, and normal palette of colors. No change whatsoever. Maybe quite boring, but I'm at home with them. Neutral tint, burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, spring green. Might be using a bit of that for that nearby hillside where the light is catching some of the trees. We've got viridian green. Be using quite a lot of that. Cobalt green. Yeah, that sea, that could be a little bit of cobalt green with a tiny bit of a burnt sienna or burnt umber in there. It's not a sort of like a sort of Mediterranean sea. This is around the Isle of Wight. So yeah, we need to dull it down a little bit, not make it too tropical. We've got cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium red, English oxide or light red, and cadmium orange, cadmium yellow. Then across the bottom, I've got lavender, a Naples lemon yellow light gouache, and a white gouache. Three mixing wells. My brushes, I will be using my brush at the moment, my Tintoretto 1407 synthetic mop brush, good point, good edge to it, and a synthetic round brush, medium sized, and a flat brush for doing some of the darks in the foliage. You'll see how I use that later on, and maybe some of the darks underneath the on the base of the boulders as well. It creates quite a nice brush mark with a hard and a soft edge with that flat brush. Questions? Are there any questions? No, I don't think there are. Okay. Right, just check. No, all right. Let's do the initial drawing then. With the drawing, for me, I would start in either of two places. I would start over the left-hand side, just work my way over, or maybe that lady's hat. that was quite a nice sort of almost like a focal point on that left-hand side. I might start with that, but in this instance, I'm going to start on the left-hand side, getting in the horizon on that left-hand side, and I'm going to make it just sort of above the center line, just a little tiny bit above that that center line. And we've got the distant headland. It does, in the source photo, it does go way over to the left. I'm just bring it over a little bit so that we can see the end of it there a little bit. And then we've got the middle headland, which comes down a little bit lower and ever so slightly rises up to meet the tree's jagged shape. That's my outline of the trees. And then the base of this headland is almost level, almost horizontal, although when it hits the beach there, it does go up by a degree or two, just like a little bit of a shallow slope to that beach, but essentially horizontal. And so try and get that in as best I can. Over to sort of that area there, where we're going to have that boulder, that lovely big boulder that's catching the light in a minute. Now, the sweep of the bay, low tide, we can see a little bit of the sea. We've got to have some sea in there, otherwise it doesn't look complete as a beach scene. So a little bit of the water in there. Coming around to the left-hand side, there is a rock or boulder on the left-hand side, which I'll get that one in. Sort of serves to, I think it balances out the distant headland in a way, and just serves to sort of frame and have a border on that left-hand side. The sand is just a little bit darker here in this depression, I guess, where the tide was going out, was about to come back in. It's a little bit damper, the sand there in that area there. Figure then, let's get the figure in while I'm over here on this left-hand side. And the figure, I'm going to zoom into my source photo. So a summary hat, and the shoulders are now there. I've instantly spotted a mistake where the line, the connection between the bottom of the hat and the shoulders is right on that shoreline. I think that's going to look a little bit odd. So let me just do that again. So let's raise the figure a little bit, just a little bit. Better. And wearing a pair of shorts, and then legs there, and there's a bag as well, something like that. And then another figure to the right. Let's get in a smaller figure, child maybe there. All right, quite simple. And the shadows will be going off to the left, just a little bit angled down. All right, so that's my two main figures. There are some more figures that I'll paint in later on. I'm not actually draw them in at this stage. Next, then the big boulder on the right. Let's get that one in, sort of this area here. And I'm going to have it all in the scene rather than, as I say, I'm trying to condense the scene. So I'm going to bring it in so that we can see the top of it and try and get the shape right as well. It's got a vertical left-hand edge, and then just in front of it is a nice light rock and various other rocks around it. Lots of contrast of lights and darks in this area here. So it's going to be light there, warm at the top, coming cooler, and then nice and dark in this area here. Now, foreground rocks, and then I'll do some of the middle ground rocks. Just following the contour of those, the top edge of those. I will get in some of the nearest rocks first and then sort of work my way back with these overlapping shapes. So let's get in one here, and these rocks they have a fairly flat base to them. Let's have another rock here. Another one. So you can get creative with those rocks, trying to get a pleasing pattern of them, different sized rocks overlapping with each other, and have different shapes as well. Not make them too perfect looking. Now in the middle ground there are an assortment of rocks as well, generally the same shape as these. Probably here what's best is just try and think of them all as one shape, and top edge first of all, and then a few just closer to us. There we go. All right, as I say, there will be a few more figures in the distance, just beyond those rocks there. I might have some space for some boats over there. I'll just see how things go so it's not too busy, if you like, on that left-hand side. And maybe I could go, if I do want to put some boats in, I could put in some very simple sort of sailing boats, just basically triangles, which I could negatively paint around, or just going with a little bit of light white gouache towards the end. Let's just let me just finish up by getting in some of the slopes, some idea of this wooded slope. There are some steps here. That's too much detail. There are some figures in there, and that might be too much detail as well. So I'm going to have to simplify things. There are some rocks here behind the big boulder. There we go. I think that's it, actually. Let's just check this lady's hat. There we go. I think it'll be right. And make sure we've got some arms on these figures as well. On the whole, there'll be darker figures against a lighter background, apart from the hat, light against a darker background. Yeah, I think that's it for me on the drawing. So I hope that is all right for you. Okay. Right, let me just see if there's any questions. No, all right. So, painting process then. I'm going to put in the sky first of all, and then the beach. Let that dry a little bit before putting in the sea, and then it's a case of course, in watercolor, working light to dark. So I'll start with the distant headland, and then I'll come closer to us, adding in those greens, and then the warmth of the rocks, and a little bit of those shadows, and then the figures. So that's basically the process. Now, to lay a smooth wash over the sky, I'm going to dampen, I'm going to pre-wet the paper first of all. Now, I've got a sponge here just to speed things up. So a sponge, a soft sponge with clear water, not too much water, over the headland as well. And then my mop brush, and lay in the sky, keeping it light there and darker, more intense in the top left corner. So a bit of cerulean blue. I could add a bit of cobalt to that, or a bit of lavender. Oops. Bit of lavender, bit of quinacridone gold went in there. Go fairly light first of all. Cerulean blue, bit of lavender over the trees. Over the hills. And now go a lot darker in that top left corner. Just basically a stronger mix of what I've used already. And then a little bit more in that very top corner. There we are. That's just a little bit more. Remember, it will dry lighter as well. So you've got to compensate for that. There we go. So just leave that. You can, if you want to, you could have made that a little bit of a yellow ochre down that bottom right-hand corner, a very light yellow ochre, and then the gradual transition into that blue if you want to, being a sort of evening type scene, but I'll just keep it nice and simple, light and darker in that sky. Okay, the beach, the sand, which I've been thinking about the color and what. Let me just go over a little bit more of this hill. What combination of colors have I got to get that color of sand? Of course, every beach has subtly different colors. I think the color of this beach is a pretty sort of ordinary color in that it's not too cool, it's not ultra warm. You know, you get some beaches that can be quite grey or dark. Other beaches very warm, very red, depending on the material that they're made of. But here we're sort of middle of the road. And I reckon with my combination of colors, a 50% sort of half yellow ochre. So if you imagine a mix of 50% yellow ochre and then about 25-30% burnt sienna, and then the balance being made up of my white, my titanium white, my white gouache. I think a combination of those is going to be quite good. That's going to give me the combination of that warm and cool, and making it quite sort of making the mix quite sort of opaque-ish with that white paint added in there. So clean brush. Let's just mop up that little bit there. Clean brush and mix the 50% yellow ochre, little bit of burnt sienna, and then this white gouache, and adjust as necessary. It's going to be quite light, so I don't want to go too dark with this, not too intense. So half yellow ochre, little bit of burnt sienna, little bit of white. And then do a bit of a test. Remember, of course, it will go lighter. I can go over the rocks here, over the figures. I'm going to go over the whole area down here, whole bottom half of the scene. Over to that right-hand side, a lot of that's going to be in the shade. We've actually got a very light rock there. I'll actually leave that the white of the paper on that white rock. Now, as this is damp, we can still go in and add some darker values in there, particularly around that area there. So a thicker mix, maybe a little bit more burnt sienna, possibly a little bit of burnt umber actually. And then just where it's a little bit damper, the sand in there. Like that. If you think it is too light, the sand, you of course can, with a tissue, just gently lift off into some areas that color. A little bit more in the distance. There we go. And then just leave it basically. That will get a little bit lighter. All right, the sea next, and then that should be a little bit drier, so I can then start doing the headlands. Let me just check for any questions. No, I don't think there's any questions. All right, so the sea then, which is, I think, a combination of a little bit of a greeny blue with a tiny bit of a brown in there. So let's just mix up that base color of a greeny blue. I've got cobalt blue here. Sorry, cobalt green. Little bit of cerulean blue in it. And it's value-wise, it's darker than the beach and not as dark as the distant headland. Darker than the sky, darker than the beach. A little bit of a test first of all. Happy with that. You can leave little bits of the paper unpainted. I'll paint around these two figures. Go a little bit lighter towards the shore. There we go. And then just let that dry a bit. Well, I think that's the wash about done. Aim is to cover most of the scene. Let's just make this a little bit lighter towards the shore. Cover most of the scene, except for those areas, of course, that are going to be light or I'm going to handle in a particular way. Good, right. I would just now speed up with the drawing of the sky there. It's still a little bit damp. The paper is still a little bit buckled. So just to speed up things for you, I would probably at this stage just go away and come back in about 10 minutes time, let it dry naturally, ideally. But to speed things up a bit, I'll just grab my hairdryer. It's just lift off a little bit. My sea was just bleeding into the sky. Right, excuse the sound of the hairdryer here. Right, I think there's a question. Oh, no. No. Okay, right. Now, the headland. So, furthest headland, then the middle one, then the right-hand one. And gradually work my way down that bottom right-hand corner. So, the distant one, first of all, is going to be a little bit of cobalt blue for me and a bit of viridian green. It's darker than the sea in value, but I need to give the impression of the distance, so a cool blue, yet it's trees, so I'm adding in a bit of a cool green being my viridian green. So I guess a sort of 50-50 mix of those two, cobalt blue and that viridian. So a really cool bluey green. And check the value. No, I need to go darker. All right, because it needs to be darker than that C. So a little bit of a thicker mix of those two together. Nearly there. And give the impression of a distant headland, the shape of it. Go up to the pencil line and then try and get in a horizontal base to that distant one. There we go. Now we're going to be a little bit more intense with the greens as we're coming towards us. Next one, then I need to paint around the figure, the hat. And this is where also I need to get in some cooler, darker shadows to create the form of the trees that we can now just begin to see their shape in this headland. And the shadows, of course, with the light coming from the right-hand side, the shadows are going to be on the left-hand side. A little bit of darkness on that left-hand side of the headland. So I will mix a little bit more of this viridian green, a bit more of the cobalt blue, perhaps a little bit of the spring green here, just a tiny, tiny bit to make the green a little bit more vibrant, but mainly that cobalt blue, viridian green. So it's going to be a good bit darker than the distant headland. So this is the lightest green of this. I'm going to go darker with the shadows later. And try with the top edge, the skyline, try and give the impression of the shapes of those trees just beginning to form there. Cover up the pencil line as well. down to the bottom. Okay, so we're coming to the lady's hat now, and this is where I need to be very careful going around this hat. Bit of a round top, and then it comes out to a wide brim. Goes in just a little bit to the shoulders, and then just continue on down to the water's edge. Now, it does get a little bit darker towards the base of this headland, and so I'm just darkening up things a little bit with a neutral tint, and there's a tiny little bit of an outcrop here, so just a gentle slope to the water's edge, and then get in that flat bottom, almost horizontal. To the middle. So in here, in this tree area, I'm just adding in a little bit of cobalt blue for those cool shadows. And I'll add in some more shadows shortly, but that's just the base of that, the base of that headland. Make sure they kind of connect with each other, and then maybe a bit of a gentle slope up to the back of the beach. Right, now the trees coming closer to us. A more vibrant green. Start off with the lighter green first of all, and then the cooler green, darker green around it. Now I'm changing here my combination of colors from that Virgin green. Well, I'm going to add a little bit of burnt umber to this Virgin green mix. That's going to give me a more intense tree foliage color, I think. Now, notice with my brush, I'm just using the edge and not much paint on the brush, and dragging it down from the top of those trees. A few little bits of sky showing through. Again, a little bit of cobalt blue to cool things up, or cool things down rather. Now connect with the middle headland. We're up against the big boulder now, and then a cooler green again over to the right hand side. Paint up to the edge of the tree, similar to the lady's hat, but we've got a larger shape to paint around here, so it's a little bit easier. And then the rocks, there'd be some warmer colour for the rocks just there. Okay, and let that dry a little bit, and then when it's damp, when the shine has gone off the surface, I'm going to go in with some darks and my flat brush just to create a bit more form to the trees in that middle headland, and especially the right hand side there, trying to get the feeling of that slope coming down, that 45-degree slope. While that's drying, then I will paint in some of the boulders. Let's make a start on those. And the color is, well, it's seaweed. It's that sort of dark golden brown, some cool colors in there, bit of alizarin crimson, but generally a sort of dark greeny brown, a little bit of gold, a little bit of a warmer brown in some places. There's all sorts going on there, but the middle ones, they will be simpler in color, but the ones coming towards us, that's where I need to pay a little bit more attention to the form of those boulders and this seaweed, almost like hair covering the boulders there. Right, that one on the left hand side first of all, and that one is definitely a sort of warm brown in a way. Let's mix down here a warm brown. So let's try a burnt umber with this one. Little bit of ultramarine blue, tiny bit of ultramarine blue. And this is a similar value. This boulder on the left is a similar value to almost that middle headland there. Perhaps a little bit of green in it. Right. Yeah, I think that looks okay. So just observing the photo, the rock comes down to a little bit of a point, and then a bit more of a shape there. A bit of an angle of the base of it. There we go. That's that rock on that side. Now these middle rocks. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow ochre into some of these. They're a little bit lighter. starting from the left-hand one, then we've got these the sort of grouping of rocks here. A bit lighter on the right-hand side. There we are. That's those middle area rocks. They'll be connected. An important bit here is connecting those middle rocks with the back of the beach with the cool shadows that I'll do later on. Some cooler light, the shadows won't be too dark, but a cool shadow coming down from the back of the beach and connecting with those. And then, of course, like the trees, I need to add in some darks in there, particularly at the base, dark value, and then shadows again from those boulders, just ever so slightly going over to the left-hand side. Okay, then this rock here, which is starting off fairly warm. And then gets a little bit cooler. So I'm going to have a little bit of cerulean blue in that, or a bit of lavender actually, a bit of lavender. And then it gets really dark. So burnt umber, neutral tint. A bit more neutral tint. Coming up to the little baby rock and that light top. There. It's going to fall into place when we connect and we add in the rocks around it. Let me do some of the rocks behind and then just fill in that space there. And then it'll be time to then go back to the trees in the headland and add in those darker shadows because it's just beginning to lose its shine a bit. And that would be a good time to add in those darks to get just a subtle soft edge to some of those shadows. All right, so the darker area some coolness in there. Darker area there, and also we've got a little bit of light. Little bit of light on that right hand side of the big boulder. I might go in a bit darker later on, but that will do. Just to cover up that space there. Right. Shadow then for the trees. Little flat brush. I could use the flat edge of the mop brush for this, but I find having a slightly smaller brush and being very flat does help me get the desired effect. So starting from that top left corner of the headland, that needs to be a little bit darker up there. So well, a little bit of cobalt blue, a bit of ultramarine blue. Maybe a little bit of neutral tint to go a little bit darker. So you can see the technique I'm using here. Just a light sort of flicking motion, but trying to get the feeling of the volume of those trees in the distance. Okay, so we're going a little bit darker now. I think there's a bit of glare on the screen. You'll see all this a little bit clear when that dries. So a bit darker, ultramarine blue, bit of burnt sienna, and fairly thick on the brush. Now this is where I want to start getting in the feeling of the bit of neutral tint, the feeling of that slope. Then coming down towards this right-hand side, not so dark here. It's actually darker there. It's actually darker in there than it is to the bottom right. Go a little bit darker just around that top edge of the boulder. A little bit of darkness on the left-hand side of some of these trees here. This brush is almost dry, there's not much water on it at all. a little bit darker there. Okay, and just with my fingertip, just merge some of those darker values a bit more, lifting off a little bit on my fingertips, just lifting off a little bit of that paint. If you want some of the dead trees that are they're quite sort of attractively growing out of the out of that bank there at a sort of 45-degree angle, then you could negatively paint around those, or I might go in later on when that's totally dry. I could go in with some gouache in there, appropriately stained to look like dead trees later on. All right. While I've got this darker value here, I could just get in some of these, the darker bits of these boulders. That needs to be darker in there. But first, let me continue with the foreground boulders. I'll just check for any questions. No, all right. So back to my mop brush then for these nearby boulders. And this is where I need to start thinking about the colors, the different colors that we can see. Cooler blues, greens, browns, all sorts going on there. It's actually a little bit greener on this right-hand side. I guess where it might be near the sort of high tide mark, and it's a different sort of seaweed growing there. Right, so let's start off with some lighter values first. A burnt sienna, a little bit of ultramarine blue. Perhaps a little bit of alizarin crimson in this as well. Bit of green. Just drop it in. Flat base. Connect with the other shapes. Let's get in these lighter values first. Do I need some rocks in here? Let's put in one here. Just soften up that edge there. There's all sorts going on here, all the colours, so just mix up. Mix up those different colours as I come down. Okay. Right, let that dry a little bit before adding in the dark shadows. While that's drying, and I need to go a lot darker in there as well to get that contrast. Yeah, quite dark in there. Some of these boulders, just um, where this boulder creating a car shadow over these. It's quite dark in there as well. All right, figure then, lady and figure, and maybe we'll get in some more distant figures as well, and just add in a little bit more form to the back of that beach. Right. This hat, first of all, a little bit of shadow on that side, and then the figure itself, clothing wise, we're going to be darker, not green, maybe a blue. And down to those shorts. And then legs. Then the other figure, the child. Walking away from us. Clothing. And then a couple of legs. And then shadow, our first sort of cast shadow in this one, and a fairly light blue, I reckon. Light coming from the top right corner, and the shadows, they go down to about, they're that sort of length. So it's sort of, I guess it sort of indicates the angle or the height of the sun. But I need that little bit of a gentle slope just to indicate the slope of the beach. There we are. Just go a little bit darker with the water's edge. And this is where I could just hint at some distant figures. Just little marks, really. Perhaps a little bit of a shadow to some of those as well. A little bit of shadow and darker values in this rock on the left, just to give it some form. And there's little bits of seaweed and debris down there. Okay, we need to pull this together with some darker values in these shadows, I reckon. I think the figure's all right. Let's just go back to this figure and put in that yellow bag. Bit of cadmium yellow, I think, for this. So that bag there. Fairly thick. There we are. Might need to add in a bit more shadow just to help with the form of that figure, but it's nearly there. Darker shadows then for these rocks. That's still quite wet down here. Just lift off some of the right hand side of some of those boulders, get in a bit more light to them. Right, back to my flat brush then, and go a lot darker now. I reckon a combination of ultramarine blue and neutral tint. Let's mix it up here actually. Neutral tint, ultramarine blue. Let's start off with my big boulder. Needs to be a bit wetter here. And then really play on the contrast around that little lighter boulder. And dark shadow under that one, dark shadow here. Okay, right, gradually moving over then. Ultramarine blue, neutral tint. Get some lavender on some of these shadows, a cooler, bluer shadow. Now go darker, darker there, darker at the base. And then this one here, and that's the boulders nearly done. As you can see, I've simplified them a good bit, not got them all in. There we are. Now we want to connect everything with each other, these boulders and the back of the beach, with some cool shadows. It's sort of late in the afternoon. They're not really dark, intense shadows. So back to my mop brush, and I think a little bit of lavender, I reckon, for this. Try that. With a little bit of cerulean blue. Not too dark. And starting from the distance there, just drag down some shadows. And there's little bits of light between those bands of shadows. Now, so yeah, I think that's quite a good combination. The lavender there with that sort of opaquish, lightish blue. But we can still, with the transparency watercolor, we can still see that a little bit of the warmth of the beach coming through. Right, let's just go in this area here. And just connecting these different shapes. There we go. Yeah, I need to go a bit more solid there. I'll get out my small brush in a minute and just add a bit more detail and definition to these boulders, but let's just continue with these shadows. Actually, some of the nearer shadows are a little bit darker. There we go. A little bit darker. This one's quite a key shadow here. And then that one and these ones here. Right, back to my small brush. And let's give it a bit more definition to the boulders, possibly thinking about some of the branches of those, the trunks of those dead trees in there. But I need that air. That's still quite damp, actually, in there. So small brush, good point to it, and just here, just in a few places, try and create some better texture, definition to these nearby shapes. That kind of seaweed that's draping over a lot of these lower rocks. And this larger rock here. A few little cracks. Could use a rigger brush actually for this. That might be a better idea. Now, going just behind this rock, there's some little smaller rocks. Of course, on a beach, we've got lots of footprints and things going on, so I'll go in with a little bit of that yellow ochre and burnt sienna just to add in a few little footprints. Maybe we could add in a few little footprints around there. The figure, let's just add in a bit more shadow on the where the bag is connected to the body. A few more figures. You always need a little bit of debris on the beach. Bits of seaweed, shells, little rocks. Not too much in the middle there. Keep that fairly clean. Do I need some but it has some sailing boats in there. Do that in a minute. Figure. There we are. Hat. Rock. Okay, I'm going to get my hairdryer out. I'll just do these dead tree trunks on that right-hand side. Right, still stick with my medium synthetic brush and, well, white gouache with some yellow ochre, I think would be good. But I got this lemon yellow, this Naples yellow gouache here. Let's see what this is like. And these tree trunks, they're growing out at right angles to that slope. There we go. Just have a feeling of some old tree trunks there. Actually, this gouache is quite good for some of the caps of these boulders. They've got some lighter stuff growing on them. Little bits of algae. Just pick a bit of lavender in there. Okay, sailing boats. Not so sure for me. I think it'd be too much going on over here on the left-hand side for me. If I was to, I'd probably put, if you imagine a slim white triangle there, maybe piercing, maybe a tall sail, maybe piercing the sky and then coming down to a boat, a hull around about there. But I'm not gonna do it. I'm gonna leave that. I could just put in a little bit of definition to some waves coming in. I did say that the sea got that sort of a brownish color to it. There. There are some little bits of highlight to some of the figures. So a tiny bit of white gouache to some of these figures. I'm conscious to think about the heights of figures as well. this figure being tall in the photo, it's almost like I might be where I am. I'm sort of crouched down. I'm looking up a little bit more rather than being on the same. Maybe I'm sat down in a chair or something like that. Uh, I think this would be a good idea, just adding a little bit of highlight to the figures, and let's just finish off. Finish off with a little bit of gouache too. These boulders here. Trying to get some of the texture of the seaweed, some of the seaweed just draping off some of these nearby rocks. There. A little bit more lavender on this one, and then I'm done. I think it's a bit too severe. I'll just use my fingertips to lift off a little bit of that blue. Yeah. Right. So, Sea View, Isle of Wight. And thanks again, Leslie, for the kind sharing of your photo. I hope you like the demo, and I'll look forward to seeing your paintings up on Patreon. Right, for me to wind things up, as I normally do, if anyone has done a sketch, I should have asked that at the beginning actually. If anyone has done